Thanks for stopping by the Junction, where we're trying to make connections between Ardmorites. I'm Ardmore Leader News Director Michael Dean Smith, and as part of our Ardmore Decides 2026 election coverage this year, I want to bring you conversations about everything appearing on Ardmore ballots coming up on April 7th. This week, we're going to learn a bit more about a proposed 1-cent sales tax that will be decided by voters next month. Joining us to talk about the proposal is Ardmore City Manager Kevin Boatright and Ardmore Mayor John Credle Jr. So, gentlemen, thank you for joining me this week.
Thank you for having us here.
Thank you very much.
Now, a lot of information that I'm going to be presenting during this interview is going to be coming either from a recent meeting you both had with a local group last month or from a podcast that was released by City Hall back in January. But before we get into the details of that tax proposal and City Hall's response to the street and stormwater infrastructure, I just kind of want to put the city's street situation in perspective, and then from there just kind of ask y'all a general question. So, two studies that were done several years ago to kind of assess pavement conditions and drainage across the city came back with a price tag of over $250 million to repair those issues. To put that in perspective, the current fiscal year budget for the city was just over $139 million, with about $4 million earmarked for street improvements. So considering street and drainage fixes are going to cost nearly 2 years worth of our annual budget, my first question to you both is really just, how did we get here? I mean, was this a failure of city leadership in previous generations? Were things designed poorly? Were they built poorly? Were things neglected? How did we get here?
Yeah, well, first of all, that's a great question, and one I've fielded a few times myself. With our 3.8, as you said, the last couple of years for the street improvement program, when we are trying to do small pieces of roadway with that money, it's hard for it to go very far. And I say that because we have done some, because some citizens said, well, what have you done the last few years with that $3.8 million? And we have that posted on our website that lists the projects, how much they cost. When we do a project right now, our average project for, I would say even a smaller size, which I was using recently, the 8th Street Northwest, it's 4 blocks, drainage and street. That project was about $1.7 million. So when we do that, you look at 4 blocks, and so you might get 2 projects done, and we have a 55-mile problem. That's how we get. Over time, you just get behind. The other thing I tell people, too, is that when the 8 in the 80s was done, what's the original tax that was passed for the streets.
And that's what still funds
and
that
it still funds
Fund
that
21 with half a cent.
Yes, sir,
Okay.
You're correct. When that was done, I'm sure in the 1980s, that funded a lot more streets. There was probably a lot more mini miles that were done versus today. And I try to tell people, you have to look at the purchasing power in the 80s and maybe early 90s versus what it is in 2026. And I just tell people, look at what you put in your grocery cart today versus what you could for the same amount of money just 5 years ago. And then the other thing is it just doesn't go as far. That's my point. And the other thing is that when these roads were done in the 80s and the 90s in that time period, from, again, the engineers, they're designed for a 30 to 35 year lifespan. So we're past that. Okay. And I think the other thing that contributes to what we see, which is the horrible streets and some of that, is the flooding. Because the flooding deteriorates the roads faster. It gets underneath the surface. It just deteriorates a subgrade. And our flooding has gotten worse. And as you know, because I know that you've heard this before, but part of our flooding is it's because of the development in the city. When you build more rooftops, when we build more parking lots and et cetera, it creates additional runoff because now there's nowhere for it to go. So you are compounding our problem. I think a lot of people think, and I think it's just easy to say, well, we wouldn't have got in this situation, and maybe if you hadn't let it get in this situation. We can easily point to what has been done the last several years to show things have been getting done. It's the total scope of the issue is so big and so large. The amount of money that we have does not go very far. And so this didn't all creep up in the last 5-10 years. I mean, these roads have been bad. It's just now that they are getting to a point where they accelerate the deterioration so fast.
Speak of rising material costs and the costs, as you mentioned, the cost of it to repair the roads. Even back in the 80s, the cost is even more, and it's extravagant. So you put all that together, we only have a small portion the budget that's going towards streets. You put all that together. When you fix one, by the time you catch up, you actually going back, and it's like almost like a cycle that you can't get out of. So it's not that things work has not been going on to get these repairs done. It's just that the task is it's just huge, in trying to get it done. That's why this presentation of the 1 cent sales tax.
I want to actually direct this question at you, John, since you're the elected representative at City Hall. Those 2 assessments that I mentioned earlier, Kevin had mentioned 55 miles of road that need repairs. Another assessment identified 17 flood-prone areas across the city. How do those findings line up with what you hear from residents and constituents and just what you've experienced on your own? Do you think that those assessments have properly identified the areas of town that need the most improvements?
So the areas of town that's definitely in need of most improvement are on the east side of Ardmore. So it's that mainly northeast side of Ardmore and southeast as well. I think the assessment has, and I think what I get from people is we're not seeing anything being done. That's the conversations that come when my phone rings. We're not seeing anything being done, and I can point out to them the different things that have been done all around the city. It's just hard to convince people that live maybe on the southeast side that things are getting done, and then even if I point out a place or part on the southeast side or the northeast side. They'll say, well, that's just one, or that's just two, So it's not a conversation that you're going to win. So I think Kevin mentioned this at one time before, and I totally agree because it's what I do as well. I think the first thing we need to do is be totally transparent and agree that we have a problem with the streets, and the streets are bad. So I start off by saying I agree with you 100%.
And I've told the commissioners just that, and I might have told you, Michael, we've spoken a few times before, is any citizen calls me and you can just name a street and they say, Kevin, I live on X street and it's horrible. I say, yes, sir, yes, ma'am, it probably is. Even if I haven't been there recently. Because we have 55 miles of terrible streets.
And that to put it in perspective, Ardmore has a little over 200 miles.
200 total.
So you're looking at about a quarter of all Ardmore streets are in some sort of disrepair.
Right. I think the only question would be is, sometimes would say, well, this street over here is worse than that. Well, I don't really get into that because we have so many terrible streets, and that's why I depend upon our pavement assessment. And I'm like, well, this is identified, which ones objectively and with analytical data, just not my opinion. But I understand as a citizen as well, the streets you live on is important.
Yeah, that's right.
The route you go to work every single day, it's important to you. The route you have to take your child to school every day, that's important to you.
Yeah.
And so I realize it's just independent on your perspective and where you might live. And to kind of dovetail into what Mayor Credle said, that's why we have started posting and trying to tell people where some of the maintenance and the work has been. That's why we've put those lists out to show people, because they're like, well, where has it been done?
Yeah.
Well, we've given you the list so you can physically get it. And I don't know if you've done it. You can get it and go drive there and look. And we're getting ready to do another posting that's just utility cuts, because, a lot of people talk about utility cuts, whereas we're so far behind on those. So I just asked the street guys, when you do your utility cuts, start providing us a list so we can put it out and people can see it.
Right.
And again, that's just to be informative and tell them, here's where we are.
Let's actually get into that here. You both actually have been a bit on a PR tour recently to talk about the need for this additional revenue. And during one of the stops at the public library last month, some questions came up about utility cuts being made, especially by outside contractors, as well as just the state of railroad crossings in town. How do those kind of issues play into the city's efforts to address road conditions? And should we be using revenue from this proposed sales tax to fix problems caused by utility contractors or railroad companies?
Right. I would say the answer is no. If it's a utility company that's not us, we should not be doing that. We have a good relationship, I should say, with our other utilities. That would be ONG, OG&E, and et cetera, and stuff like that. what happens sometimes, and I mentioned this, I think at the meeting that you were at, is that sometimes we don't get told about those. That's where the disconnect is they have an emergency maybe over on the weekend or at night, a gas line's broke or something's happened. They've come in on the weekend, so that crew comes in, digs up the street, repairs the utility, fills it full of rock, and they drive off. And if they don't tell us about it, of course we don't know. And they're like, well, Kevin, that's been there for a year. And I talked to our people, and their first thing is they look, and they're like, I don't think that's us. And I think I might have mentioned we had one recently where a gentleman actually busted his tire. And we contacted our utility guys, and they're like, Kevin, we haven't even been over on that block. And so I sent the photos that the citizen sent me, their busted tire.
Yeah.
And I said, well, he's not very happy right now. And they looked, and they're like, they went and researched it in less than an hour. They called me back and said, Kevin, that's ONG. We're on the phone right now, and we'll get with them. And I said, well, please get this citizen in contact with ONG. And because now it's their issue. And I'm going to be honest, I assume it was resolved because that citizen has not contacted me since. And I'm not got to call back and do it. But sometimes those things happen. I would say the vast majority of utility cuts that I'm aware of are either water or sewer cuts. Those that include OG&E or ONG, I would say would be a smaller percentage. But they do happen. Okay. Now, specifically at that meeting, they talked to me and the mayor about, which was Dobson Fiber. And I don't want to make it too long for this podcast, and we have had issues with Dobson Fiber. I'm nothing negative against the company itself, but the ones coming in that are putting in the fiber optic are contractors for them. Right. We have had so many disagreements and so many issues with, I'm just going to say, the not very good job, I guess, is that they're doing. I know for a fact they're on at least their third contractor. Okay. Because they have had issues. We have expressed our concern. Our citizens and businesses have said they're awful when I go out there to talk to them about what they're doing, of what they've destroyed, as far as communicating back. And as a result, we've gone through 3. So, and to their credit, they've agreed with us, hey, this company hasn't worked out. They've gone to another one. This one didn't work out. Now we're on to another one. That is not completely unusual. But in that case, no, I don't expect citizens to have to pay for what they're doing. So as I mentioned that meeting, we have a city staff person that's our designated liaison. Right. And that if you have a Dobson problem and you call City Hall, I asked Lori, I said, get it to that person because he's the person. And if they don't meet weekly, I know they meet at least every other week to talk about any outlying issues they might have. Okay. And I'll let the mayor, if you want to, I'll let you tackle. You want to talk about the railroad a little bit? Since that was brought up.
Do you want to?
Yeah. Do you want to? Yeah. That way I don't have to talk about it again. But.
So we've had ongoing challenges, just communication wise, with the railroad. Just trying to get some things fixed. Why is this? One season we had a train that was just sitting there on 3rd for over a week. It might have been even longer than that, just sitting there. And the calls didn't stop. The calls kept coming. I think that was on 3rd, blocking 3rd, if I'm not mistaken. And we tried to get in touch with different individuals. And then for years prior to that, we had trying to remember the street. It crosses by the. We had one crossing that was critical because we had a senior who lived right there, and that one crossing that we had that was shut down for the longest. And the repair, of course, is on them. They had to make the repair so they can open that back up. Well, we had a citizen who wanted to take on. We tried to make contact. We tried to call. We would try to email. We actually had 2 citizens go at it. One who lived right by the pool, right. and another one whose parent was he's now deceased. Lived there and was worried about response time from
emergency
EMS,
services,
emergency services, different things like that. They have to go all the way around just to get to him, and other citizens as well. But of course, her concern was her, her relative. So that being said, Kevin said maybe and I too said, well, maybe you'll have some better luck at. She actually took it on, a citizen. I love that. A citizen agreeing to take it on. The other one also agreeing to take it on and contact people. So and then when it came back to us, they were finding the same problems. The people were changing. First, this person is in charge. 3 months later, another person in charge. 3 months later, another person is in charge. So it's the communication has been a problem. And recently, because they wanted something, and this is how I'm going to pass it on to Kevin, because they wanted something, they reached out to us, and now the tables have turned, and now Kevin could probably tell you better about what happened there, which is probably still going.
Right. They want to make a long story short. They wanted to meet, which that was very unusual because our communication, as the mayor said, has been poor.
Yeah,
that's just the facts.
Yeah.
Through multiple city engineers and myself, and as you said, a couple of citizens. We told them we're not trying to take our work and put it on you, but
right.
We want you to.
They wanted to do it actually.
Yeah, they're like, hey,
we weren't
give
putting
us
it
the
on
numbers.
There.
Give us the numbers. I'll call them, and I said,
right.
Yes, ma'am.
Right.
And I gave them the numbers, and of course they started realizing what we did. Kevin, they won't do anything. I'm like, correct.
This is what we've been doing.
If they call you back.
And I think their thing is like, well, can't you make them?
Yes, and I think that's a common misperception. I think of our citizen is that somehow we have the authority to do it. And as I mentioned at the meeting that you were at, we've had the Oklahoma Corporation Commission be here. We've talked to ODOT on what they can do. I've spoken to Congressman Tom Cole, who's a federal congressman about it. And they've all said pretty much the way federal law is written, the railroads basically answer unto themselves. Yeah. I can't force them to do anything. And that's very frustrating, not just for our citizens, but for John as the mayor and myself as the city manager, to go through all these and feel like you're having no impact. But it's impacting our citizens. Yeah. So it's frustrating on our part to do that. And I think a lot of citizens, that it's nobody's fault. They just don't realize. But I can honestly say most of our attempts with the railroad have been very unsuccessful. As I said to them in our first meeting we had, I said, do you know what the nicest, most recent railroad crossings we have in Ardmore are? And this, you know where I'm going on this, and it's true. And they're like, no. And I said, when we redid Main Street down here for part of the streetscape, I said, that crossing is beautiful. And I said, you know why? Because the citizens of Ardmore paid for it. And then I said, the most recent one is we did another one over here on Sunset and Hollingsworth. That railroad crossing is 10 times better than it was before. And I said, you know why? Because the citizens of Ardmore paid for it. I said, when we're paying the tab, it seems like things can get approved. We ask BNSF to do something, it's crickets.
Right.
And again, not trying to put off, that is the true facts. And that's why with our last meeting with the BNSF representatives, I asked the commissioners to be there. I wanted them to see and hear what I'm seeing and hearing. And basically their stance was they want to help us do some things now, but they want us to close 3rd Street Northeast, which is a major thoroughfare for the east-west connection of the city and all the citizens of Ardmore. And I'm paraphrasing for you, John, and the other commissioners, but basically they said that's a non-starter. Yeah. If that's where the conversation starts, then we don't really have much to add.
Okay. In other words, at least some good faith should be shown on their end.
Sure.
First, before we even talk about closing 3rd. I'm not for closing 3rd. But for it to be a conversation, some good faith should be shown on a lot of end. They have, in my perspective, they have a lot of catching up to do in that area before we can even talk about doing something like that.
Okay. Let's bring it back. We're talking with Ardmore City Manager Kevin Boatright and Ardmore Mayor John Credle Jr. about the proposed 1-cent sales tax that'll be appearing on Ardmore ballots coming up on April 7th. Getting back to that, gentlemen, Ardmore's budget includes Fund 21. That's the Street Improvement Fund. That's the one that currently collects a half-cent sales tax on most purchases and generates just under $4 million every year. I think 3.8 is what you would put that at.
Yes, sir.
The proposed sales tax that we're talking about right now, estimated to generate just under $8 million every year. So that would bring the grand total to somewhere around $12 million annually.
Correct.
But even after 10 years of those two revenue streams, that would still generate less than half of what engineers expect fixing all these issues would cost.
Correct.
What cost reduction measures can be made elsewhere in the city's budget that might be able to help divert more money to roads and drainage?
That's a great question. One of the other funds that we can use is our GAPS tax. There's a GAPS tax that's collected. Now, the majority of that is spent on police and fire capital. And so some people have broached that. I've talked to the city commissioners about it. And we could. And that fund generates about $3.8 million because it's a half cent as well. And do that. But so let's just say we take, I don't know, half of that, leave the other half for fire and police capital and do that. We can do that, and that would help us get closer. But it's still not, again, we're not going to get to that amount. We did reach out to our federal delegation, and we were able, for the interest of time, I won't go through it, but after many steps, there is not an official announcement, but it looks like we're going to get possibly up to $7.5 million that'll go towards one of the huge flooding issues, which is 12th and Commerce. So we're trying to get any money, my term is looking under any rock we can to say, hey, is there some money under there, something we can use? As far as other cost-cutting measures, I hate to just throw one out, a specific one besides the GAPS tax that we could reduce that. Because someone said, well, you just need to use all the GAPS tax. And I'm like, I don't think that's a really smart move when that's where you purchase all of your police cars, all your fire trucks, all the bunker gear, all of those things they're critical for public safety. And I think that's what some citizens don't. I can let mayors speak to it as an elected official, but when we're looking at that entire budget, it's to balance all of the needs of the city. And the streets are bad, but they're not the only needs we have. We have many water issues. We have many other issues when it comes to public facilities, when it comes to public safety. There are, I would say, tons of projects that are on the plate that have to do with water specifically. We're doing a huge project now that's going on at City Lake. There's another one planned at Mountain Lake, and people are like, well, that's way out. Why is that an issue? I said, that is the upper end of our alternate water supply. We just spent $3 million the commission approved, and there'll be another $3 million next year for water rights. And that is to protect and make sure we have ample water as the city grows in the future. So are there other places? I'll let the mayor speak to his opinion on this. The answer is absolutely yes. But what you pick to cut in order to help something out, you have to be very careful with it because you're looking at the balance of all the needs of all the citizens, all of the employees, the equipment you're trying to keep up, and those kind of issues. And that is where, I guess, what you say, it's probably different if I got 10 people in this room and I kind of just gave them a broad picture of all of the budget and where the money goes, I bet you I would get at least 9 to 10 different opinions of this should be allocated here or that. And to me, we come up as a staff and say, here's our suggestions. But ultimately, it's up to the city commission. They look at it and say, hey, I think this should be the priority this year, Kevin, or hey, I think we need to push on this more this next time. So yes, those are there are. It says, is there other things you could do? Absolutely, you could do it. But my only thing would be to be cautious doing that you don't, to fix one problem, you don't create one or two others. Mayor, I don't know if you want to add.
So from a citizen perspective, yes, they view it as, let's just take all of that, the GAP stack, and let's put it towards the streets. So the citizens' view, the difference between the commission view and the city manager's view of it is there needs to be healthy balance. And we still need to do this, but also fix this big street problem, as well. Problem is, from the average citizen standpoint, they're looking at what they use all the time. That's a problem. I'm always hitting this bump as I go to work. I'm always, when I go to Walmart, I always have to dodge past this street.
A very specific instance they're talking about.
They're saying things like that. But they're not looking at other things that they really do, public safety, use every day, as well as water every day. Those things, the difference is you're not aware of those things, or you don't miss them until they're not there.
Right.
And then if we did that, it's like, I call, why did it take so long for our officer to get to where, you remember we took all the money, and I'm just hypothetical. We took all the money from this fund and put it over here, and because we didn't have these cars or the things that we get, it impacted that. So it has to be healthy balance. I think it's unreasonable to say we should take everything from this and everything from that and put it over there. So I guess my job as a commissioner and mayor, when citizens approach me, is to help them understand. You want the water to be right when it comes out of that faucet. You want, if something happens at your home, you feel threatened, you want a police officer to get there in an appropriate amount of time, and it takes buying cars, the right car to get them there. You don't want the car breaking down on the way because we couldn't buy the proper car to get them there. So those are the things. The questions I get, or the things I get, issues I get encountered with, that I have to show them that we have to do all these things. And I will say this, it is a small amount, but I believe that small amount that we'll get from this 1%, I think we'll see some bit, like, again, the people saying, I don't see any change. I think this will help them to say, well, I'm starting to see some things now. And it may not be everything they want to see, but at least the narrative will change to, now I'm starting to see some things, but we still have a long way to go. That would be progress if we hear them say that. Because right now they're saying nothing is being done. So I think we're going from, and that's not true, but they're saying nothing is being done. And so I think we will go from nothing is being done to I'm starting to see something. They're not going to say, oh yeah, all these streets are getting done. They're not going to say that, but it's a step by step, You
had mentioned this a moment ago, Kevin. One of the biggest individual projects I've heard you talk about is that intersection of 12th and Commerce, where anybody knows even a moderate rain shower causes some pretty nasty flooding down there. And I believe I heard you say that to fix just that intersection alone would cost upwards of $25 million.
That's correct.
That's about 10% of that total $250 million price tag that you mentioned. So considering Ardmore streets do include some state and federal highways, how are our delegations in Oklahoma City and Washington, D.C. being brought in to help try to find some solutions to these issues?
As I mentioned, we went to a federal delegation for those. That would be the U.S. Senate and the U.S. Congress. So we worked with Senator Mark Wayne Mullen on the Senate side, and obviously Congressman Cole on the House side. We asked actually for the full amount, including engineering. So we actually asked for $15 million from each. So we wanted 30. So we wanted to include, because a lot of people don't understand either, which the mayor does, because he sees it and they have to approve it. How much engineering cost? It is astronomical. So when I say $25 million, and I would say to do that job, we're just going to spend $3 million in engineering, most people would say, what? It is. It's around 10%, sometimes a little more, but it's something you have to have done. So we asked for that, and as I said, it went through all the processes. For the sake of time, I won't go through all the steps they go through. But when it made it through all the committees and it finally got appropriated in the House committee, we got $7.5 million. So that $7.5 million we wouldn't have got if we hadn't asked. Asked for 30, I got 7.5. Would I rather have 30? 100%. But the point is, we're asking, trying to say, what can you do to help us? We've met with ODOT because that is a state highway. They've met with us and said, yes, Kevin, if you do this, we will be a participant because it is a state highway. When I tried to drill them down more on, okay, what about how much do you think? Is that $3 million or 4 or 5, whatever? Like, well, we can't comment. But I can't tell you that, but we will participate because it is a state highway, and that's kind of what we got out of it. So my hope is, between the federal money, anything that ODOT, can provide, that our 25 will be a lot less. Does that make sense? But I do know, because that is one of the busiest intersections in the entire city, that is a priority. To get that done. And when people say that, I want to tell them too, when they look at that drainage study, that's not just the specific physical location of that intersection. Right. It also goes farther north and over to the east because everything drains to there.
You've got to look at where that water's coming from.
Right. What's creating that? So it's not just that intersection; it's everything that contributes to that.
Misunderstood.
And so it's kind of misunderstood. I'm like, if you get the drainage study and you look at it, it has a map and it kind of shows you the areas that are affected that would make it necessary to fix that in order to fix the intersection itself. And that's a lot of cases, and that's what I've tried to explain to some citizens that have asked. Another one that is horrible that we've got on the list is over in the tree streets and all that flooding over there. Well, a lot of that's because it drains from the west and it all comes east. And they're like, Kevin, and when you get over there, Comanche and Ash and, those are horrible. I mean, they're not bad. They're horrible. Yeah. But as I tell everybody, they're like, why don't you fix that? Well, we really need to fix what's the cause, and that's the flooding of everything that comes from the west and comes through that that whole subdivision. So they need to be addressed. And we have others, too, which the mayor can name. We're like that, too. And that's the reason, talking to the subject matter experts, I will say, that did the 2 studies, is they said, Kevin, you can't look at one without the other. The drainage issues and your street issues are hand in hand. So you've kind of got to look at those. And the other thing is people have said, well, I had this to a group I spoke to Sunday afternoon. Asked me this, and they said, well, Kevin, why are you only asking for a penny if it's you need twice that? And I said, well, I am trying to be reasonable here, but that's what they, well, if you really need it, you need it. And I'm like, I appreciate that, and you see it. But again, we're trying to be cognizant of that we're working for the taxpayers, and we're not trying to take all your money. And the other thing, which they put in perspective to me, they're like, well, Kevin, have you figured that up? And I said, figured what up? And they're like, well, it's a penny for every dollar, right? And I'm like, yes. And they're like, do you realize that for somebody to cost them an extra $10, they got to spend $1,000? And I said, well, I didn't, but thank you for pointing that out. So I think there's a lot of misconception, too, of how much that penny is going to affect people. And again, I just go back, and I'll let the mayor talk his point. I think one of the biggest selling points for the sales tax is that we know for a fact that over a third of it's paid by non-residents. That's either commuters coming off I-35 or people that just come here to shop, work, or seek health care. If you can, let's say it's going to raise 80 to 90 million, that's what the bond attorneys say, that's projected. If you can get 25 to 30 million, and as an Ardmore resident, you don't have to pay for it, that tax burden's being spread out among a lot more people. And my argument to that also would be, these people also drive on your roads. They drive on our roads every day. So why not share that tax burden a little bit out? Mayor, I don't know what your take is on that.
Well, that's been the big plus. The big plus for citizens, and that they mentioned that, well, at least we don't feel like we're shouldering it on our own with this 1 cent sales tax if we agree to it and the vote goes that way. We also getting all of the people. We getting people who work here and then leave, go to school here or whatever, shop here, all the different things, and then go back somewhere else. We're getting all that as well when they buy some things and different things. So they feel like it almost feels like to them. Exact wording, I got that. They have friends for the cause. Sure. That is the plus, that you have the ones that are just coming in off it, and that's a large percentage. If you just look at lunchtime, and drive around, you could tell that, and then compare that to after hours. Or earlier, you can tell that it's a large portion of the city during daytime versus nighttime, that can contribute to that.
And then finally, a lot of the worst street and drainage issues here in Ardmore will likely have to be bid out for engineering and even construction. But in recent years, Ardmore has made some purchases to potentially bring some of that work in-house. Specifically, there was that asphalt zipper purchase that was made recently.
We did not make that.
That purchase was not made?
No.
Okay.
That was actually budgeted, and that's what I try to tell people when we talk about streets, and I talk to the city commission. If anything that people get, I would hope from your podcast, Michael, is that this is not something that's just now people are upset and now we're looking at it. This is something that's been discussed for years. Those studies were started several years ago because the commission spoke to me and said, Kevin, what can we do to make large, substantive, positive impacts? Because the way we're going about it, doing a few blocks here and a few blocks there, a patch here, that's not large, substantive. A lot of people don't see it.
Right. Right.
And so one of the things we looked at is because I think doing the same thing over and over, expecting a different outcome, that's not what we want to do. So one of the things we looked at was a new piece of equipment called the asphalt zipper.
Right.
And we had them demo it here, talked to other cities, city commission approved it. Well, when we got it and we started talking about actually going that route to do more streets, it was to save money and to pick up the pace and get more done. What we discovered is that when we talked about going out to bid and talked to the contractors, this would have been logistics of how we were going to do it. Are we going to use asphalt zipper for a block or two, and then contractor will come in and asphalt it and maybe curb it? Well, what we found is the contractors we spoke to said, Kevin, you can do it, and we understand why you want to do it because it can save you some money. But let me tell you something you don't know. And I'm like, what is that? And they're like, if you ask us as a contractor to do this, where we have to come in and do a block or two, because you just don't want chewed up streets all over the place. If you ask us to do that, we're going to charge you as a contractor a lot more money because we're going to have to come in, set up, do the roads, leave. Come in, set up, do a few roads, leave. Come in, set up, do a few. Yeah. We're going to charge you more. I'm not a road contractor, so I did not realize, but I understand the reasoning behind it. And so when I did that and we kind of started crunching the numbers, we're like, you know what? This isn't really going to save us what I thought.
Okay.
And I think that is the beauty, of the mayor and our city commission is that they can be flexible. That we know what? We thought on the paper, on pieces, some things look good on paper.
Yeah.
But when you get in reality and start talking about the people the contractors in this case that would come in and do the finish work, and they start, well, that's fine, Kevin. I understand why, but we are going to charge you more. And I'm like, well, how much more? And we start just do simple math on a piece of paper. You're like, you know what? This isn't the great idea that I thought it was. And so we dropped back and said, let's don't do that then.
Okay.
And so that's when we started looking at, well, what if we look at just streets that we can mill and overlay because those are the cheaper streets where you don't have the utilities and the drainage issues and stuff like that.
Really just resurfacing.
Yeah, you're resurfacing the top. Well, we found some, and that was just awarded. So we have like 9 streets. And the majority of those are in the Northeast and Southeast.
Yes.
If you look at the list, the majority are there. I think we made sure we had a street in every ward. I think we did that on purpose. But I think the majority are in the Northeast and Southeast, as the mayor said, because that's where they need it. I mean, there's a lot more over there to do. But we decided to go that route because we could award it to a company, and they're going to do 9 streets because of their conversations that we had with them. And they're like, hey, if you'll do it this way, we'll try to get you a better price. And we'll try to knock them out in a hurry.
Okay.
And so, again, that's the beauty. I'm going to, pat him on the back. He's here, the mayor, but our city commission is, once we got that feedback, I went back to them and said, you know what? We're not going to do that, but here's why. Because ultimately, what's the goal here? To fix some streets.
In a timely manner.
In a timely manner and with the budget we have. And if this is going to help us do it better, faster, more efficient, whatever adjective you want to add, then we're for it. And we're going to do it. So thank you for bringing that up.
Thank you for that update. I do appreciate it. All right. Well, we've been talking with Ardmore City Manager Kevin Boatright and Ardmore Mayor John Credle Jr. about that proposed 1-cent sales tax coming up on the April 7th ballots. If you plan on voting in that election, you do need to be registered with the Carter County Election Board by March 13th. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining me this week. I do appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.